Hey everyone, Yasin here, and in this video I want to talk about what I wish I knew about cross-disciplines. So what do I mean by cross-disciplines? Well, I mean things that aren't exactly like they're not in your field technically, kind of, but they help it. They're sort of things that are outside. So um, I'm coming from sort of an illustration centered focus here, where I'm assuming, people talk about wanting to learn how to draw, and usually they mean illustration or maybe, concept art and stuff. So there are a lot of things that can help you draw better. And the primary things that you hear about all the time are the fundamentals. So, perspective, proportion, anatomy, um, edge control, values, color, things like this. But there are a bunch of things that can actually help you draw better that aren't the fundamentals. And I thought I would share a few of those things. Like, there's tons of things. These are just a few of the things that I experienced personally that helped me. So, to start with, one of the things that's helped me the most in drawing has been animation. And what it helps you do is it helps you to, as I've written here, understand forms, keep things on model. It also helps you with basic anatomy. Now, what I mean by basic anatomy is not necessarily the muscles and their names and things like that. It's more like a simplified human figure where you learn how to take this simple human figure and move it in space. So you may not have all the intricate, detailed anatomy in place, but you have the general forms. And anatomy really helps with this because you have to be very loose and you have to draw over and over and over again. And gesture you get from anatomy because this is how things look animated. If you want something to look good in animation, you're going to need gesture. And one of the most important things you get from animation is you lose the fear of having to draw things over and over again. And this is essential because if you're like for me, when I used to draw before I started animating, it felt like every drawing was somewhat rare and that I couldn't count on replicating it. Like, if I did something that looked good, it felt like luck. It felt like, well, that turned out well, but as if it was a big surprise to me. And because I didn't expect it to turn out well, because I didn't feel in control of my drawings. I felt like it was kind of just hit and miss. Maybe I'd get lucky and it turned out well, maybe not. But if it did turn out well, there was this fear of like, well, I can't mess with that. So for instance, let's say I did a head and I drew one eye and that eye turned out okay. Um, there was no guarantee that the other eye would turn out okay. So then that felt like, oh shoot, what do I do? And many characters ended up having eye patches because one eye turned out fine, and that's the eye that I liked, and the other one turned out bad. Um, and so there's this like fear when you draw like that because you don't know. Maybe it's gonna be good, and if it's good, I don't want to mess with it because I wasn't expecting it to be good, and it's good now. So it's like whoa. But with animation, you draw so many drawings. There's no place for this. It's you. Yeah, you did the eye, fine, whatever. You have to draw another one, and another one, and another one. So you lose this thing of being precious with your drawings, and you start to feel free because you can just take an eraser and erase the thing. And if it's good, you kind of have the sense after drawing so many drawings that you can do it again. So animation is great for that. And another thing is stretch and squash, and this is something that there are certain concepts in animation like stretch and squash, like smear frames, when the drawing kind of turns all like a blur almost to show movement. And this is not something you really observe in nature. Now, if you took like a ball and you bounced it, right? You're not gonna you're not gonna notice how much that ball stretches and squashes. However, if you looked at it through like ultra slow motion cameras, you would see it really stretches and squashes quite a lot. So in animation, we do those things to convey the movement of what's really happening, and we kind of exaggerate that. But that also makes illustrations look better too. Like if you're not doing animation. So this is what I mean by cross-discipline. This is assuming you're not an animator. You don't want to animate, or that's not your end goal. But what can you gain from animation, even if you're not trying to be an animator? Okay. So the next is 3D. So 3D and VR. This is something I learned just this year. I needed to learn 3D because I was drawing my comic and there were so many perspective shots and things, and it just felt like this is taking forever. I need to this would be so much faster if I just had a 3D model of this room and I could turn it in space rather than each time having to plot vanishing points and whatnot. So that was the intent, just to save time. But what happened is by using 3D and VR, VR is really good for this as well. So I'm just going to combine them, 3D and VR. What you're essentially doing is you're manipulating an object in this virtual 3D space, but it's being projected on a 2D screen. Whereas in real life, we're seeing things in a 3D space, but it's also 3D, like it's real. So we're not actually seeing that 2D screen. And what happens with the 2D screen, somehow, for me anyway, is it allowed me to almost take each frame of a thing I was moving and treat it like a snapshot. So I was learning subconsciously. I wasn't like consciously doing this, but I was subconsciously learning how to draw things in perspective. Just because as you turn a thing in 3D, you're seeing like thousands and thousands of kind of still frames in quick succession of this form turning. And so you start to kind of intuit perspective. It's strange, but it works. And when I was doing 3D, my forms, when I was drawing, got much better. Now, I don't like doing 3D, so I don't enough, and I've noticed my forms got worse. So 3D is good. It can be very helpful to learn, and especially if you want to understand perspective intuitively, but you don't necessarily want to go through the really difficult and boring. Okay, for me, it's boring. Perspective is kind of boring. For some people, it's very exciting and it's fun. And maybe architects or people like that might be have lots of fun with perspective. But for me, I never had fun with perspective. It always felt like a chore. So 3D can help. Not only to create the model, but even outside of 3D, just to get a sense of how to draw a thing on a 2D surface, but make it look three-dimensional. Okay, so this one is kind of like, it's not really essential. I'm just including it because I realized like this actually did help me a lot in terms of building an understanding of anatomy. And so bodybuilding, why it's so helpful, or why it was helpful to me, is because there's a big difference between looking at an anatomy book and seeing the muscles drawn there, or, you know, if you're using like photography or whatever, there's a big difference between seeing it outside and feeling it on your own body and understanding like how the muscle moves and being able to like turn your arm and see the muscle. So this one I'm not gonna make a big deal out of. It's very optional. I'm sure lots of things, like for instance, if I was skinny when I was young, so it's easier for me to draw skinny people because I kind of have this memory of what it's like to be skinny. Um, and then I got kind of fat, so then that helped me understand like how to draw the gut or the double chin a little better. So having things to reference in yourself can often help you, and in ways that, I didn't need to study anatomy. You can feel the muscles contract when you have more muscle. It's easier to feel what's going on in your body and then to translate that into a drawing. So I would say this is more for people who are interested in like uh, superheroes and whatnot. If you really want to draw a lot of muscly people, this could help. Um, okay, now this one is super important. Graphic design. This is something I saw a lot, or didn't see a lot, but I heard a lot from people I would interview. I used to interview artists, and when I talked to a lot of them, they had a graphic design background, or the artists who had a graphic design background, I should say, they had a much better sense of composition, of colors, how to, what I mean by presentation is like how to make a thing look good in different formats. So, for instance, how to make a poster look good, where to put the text on this poster so that it looks appealing visually, how to design merchandise. If you have a t-shirt, where do you put the logo or the image? What's the spacing like? What is optimal? So all of these things really helped. And symbology, what I mean by that is understanding the effect certain symbols have on us, like a psychological effect. So, for instance, different colors make us feel different things. Um, if you want someone to be hungry, for instance, um, browns, yellows, and reds really help to elicit this type of hunger thing. And that's why you see lots of fast food restaurants have like yellow, red, and brown in their logos, and orange sometimes. So you're kind of manipulating the viewer using color and how it affects the psychology. Other symbols could be things like how typefaces work. For instance, if you have a typeface that is very bold and heavy, that will feel grounded and solid and structured and sort of dependable. And so if you look at company logos, for instance, and you see a company and it's got very heavy text, it might feel very industrial but also reliable. Like, I can trust this whatever this saw or this hammer because it's coming from a brand that has like a serif font that's very bold and thick. So again, it's playing on psychology. So graphic design definitely helps with illustration and drawing in general. All right, traditional painting. This is also very useful. What it gives you that digital painting doesn't give you is you have to be way more disciplined, especially if you're doing something like watercolor or oil painting. You have to think. You can't just make an oil painting by throwing down color. I mean, can't. Um, take it with a grain of salt. I mean, usually, if you're just like using oil paints and you're just putting paint down, paint down, paint down, and like putting color on top of each other and you're expecting it to stay clean, it's not gonna. If you use watercolor and you get dark too fast, and the paint dries before you can lift it off, you're kind of stuck. So there are these things where you have to slow down when you're traditional painting. You have to slow down and think. There's a process. There's a method that you have to do step by step, and doing it in this methodical way really makes you more disciplined. It makes it so you don't approach painting from such I don't know, frantic or erratic mode, you kind of have to slow down a bit. So that's one of the things you get. Economy of line, because lines matter. You can't just Control Z and undo it. And so you start to think, what is the right brushstroke that I should put here? And brushwork, because you are using essentially a textured brush whenever you do traditional painting, you end up learning like how to make cool stuff happen with the brush, how to manipulate things. And so if you then go into digital and you want to replicate that, you kind of know what you're looking for. So it's something that, there's a lot more that I'm not including because I either forgot or it would take too long to put all the things. But definitely there is a space for traditional painting in terms of developing these types of skills. Now, this one is incredibly important, possibly the most important out of all of them, and it's also something that is not talked about nearly enough for how much it actually gives you, but it's observation. So just looking at the world around you and understanding it. Like, if you can understand basic physics, not in terms of formulas and stuff, but just how the world works, it makes everything way easier to understand. If you can understand like basic engineering principles, or if you can just look at body language. So for myself, a few years back, I was drawing, and I started to I was doing like these drawings in a park of people, and they were just walking by, and then I noticed I was trying to get the proportions right and get the clothing or whatever right as quickly as I could, and then I started to think, and I thought, what if I stop drawing, and instead of drawing, I'm just gonna look at what people do, and I noticed so many things that I wasn't seeing when I was drawing, because when I was drawing, I had to juggle all this information like proportion, anatomy, perspective, values. All these things were in my head while I was trying to look at a person and observe and put down what I saw. So instead, when I just focused on looking, I noticed when people walk, they don't really have their hands to their side as they walk. And that's what I was, I kept drawing people with their hands to their side when they walk, because it seemed like, people have their hands to their side when they walk. That's what they do, right? In walk cycles, that's usually what people do. But it's not what I observed. What I observed is that people would have their hands in their pockets, or one hand on a phone, or they were holding a bag, or they had their arms folded, or they were holding someone else's hand, or they were eating something, or they had an arm raised, or whatever. Like, there were all these things that I wasn't seeing because I was trying to draw instead of observe. So observation is hugely important. And artists like Kim Jung-gi, they're observing all the time, and then they record what they saw. But first you look, you see how things actually are. You see what the world actually is like. And if you start to understand what you're seeing, things get way easier. You can understand things like detail. For instance, if I'm drawing some mechanical object, I don't understand it at all in terms of how this thing is constructed, what the things are for. Everything is like a detail I need to kind of make sure I get, because I don't, it's like, oh, what is this component made like? All right, there are these like hinge-like things. I better draw those. What do those look like? However, if I understand basically like how a hinge works, what a hinge is for, well, this thing needs to open and close, so it's going to need a hinge. The hinge is going to need to be secured with probably a screw on either side, and then you have the part that bends. I don't need to, observe or I don't need to translate exactly what I see and pay special attention to exactly what it is, because I understand its function. And so I can invent things and I can sort of put things down because it's like, well, yeah, that's how it works. So if you can learn that, and the best way to learn is to start looking at things. And I would suggest objects in your home, just around you. Start to not just look at the object, but interact with it and see what the things are for. See what happens if you turn a knob. Look at screws. Why are the screws there? Look for seams in clothing. Look for zippers and buttons and things like that. If you want to get better at clothing, something that helped me was looking at things for sewing, because it shows how to I don't know what they're called, like templates or something for that you use to make clothing. It'll show where like the fabric is attaching, and so you understand the seams and you understand where that falls on the body, and you start to understand why things are made the way they are. So observation is huge, 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 extremely important. All right. So storyboards and comics. How does this help drawing outside of storyboards and comics? Well, it really helps with pacing, with creating shots, understanding how to convey a thing, especially when it's conveying mood. You can understand how to make someone feel powerful, put their head close to the top of the frame, have it so you're kind of looking up at them, or the opposite, make it so you're kind of looking down on the person, their head's lower on the frame, and they'll feel weaker, they'll feel smaller. Things like that. It really helps. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it does help, and let's move on. Okay, writing is also something that really, really helps, and it helps a lot more than one would expect, because when you design characters after you've written stuff about them, and maybe it's not necessary that you write as much as you think, but I think writing helps because it, you can refer back to it. But thinking about things, the story behind things, thinking about the purpose of things, it really makes a big difference. When you think of a character and they have like objects on them, like a pouch or something, but it's just for design because you saw some characters, like I see this in a lot of like manga or anime, the characters, or even like video games where sometimes the characters just have stuff on them, belts and pouches and things, but for no reason. It can create this like fakeness to everything. Nothing feels quite genuine. But if you've thought about it and this pouch is where this person stores this specific thing that is important to them, that is part of their character, things like that, you start to build much more authenticity to your characters, or anything, backgrounds, whatever, any kind of storytelling. When you think, and in this case I'm talking about writing, and you write down things about your story, it just makes your art much richer, but in a way that's not easy to explain, because it's not like a fundamental in art, like perspective, where there are rules and whatnot. I mean, there are these guidelines for how to make a good story, but outside of that, just for a single illustration, writing can really help. And if you look at the art of Norman Rockwell, you can really see that his illustrations are a story. They tell a story. And so being able to think like this is very important. Okay, digital. So I talked about traditional painting and what it can do to help, and sometimes people talk a lot about traditional as if traditional is better than digital, and I don't think in those terms. I think uh, that's a counterproductive way of thinking when you think about this is better than this, um, as opposed to uh, viewing things um, sort of more fairly and treat everything like it has its pro and its con. And what is the pro of digital? Well, the biggest thing digital offers is the freedom to experiment. You're not limited by a limited palette, for instance. You can really try different things. You can transform things. You can move things around. You can, um, you know, photo bash if that's what you're into. You can do all sorts of things, and you really have that freedom. You're not like putting down a color and then thinking, "Uh-oh, I I put down a lot of this color," meaning a traditional painter might be thinking, "Well, this I put down a lot of paint and it's the wrong color now that I put it down. I'm gonna have to scrape it off, and I know that paint tube costs $20, and that's a lot, and it's expensive, and oh no." And there's like this fear because you know the tools cost money, or the materials cost money, and it's kind of scary. You don't want to waste as much. Whereas with digital, it doesn't matter. You can put a color down. You can change it at any point. You can be a lot more free. So when it comes to digital, I think it's the best playground to feel more free, to experiment. And I think people who aren't experimenting are really missing out on the best part of digital, which is just that thing. You can see, what does it look like this? What if I did this? What if I did this? What if I moved it here? What if I changed the color here? What if I made it bigger? What if I made it smaller? You can non-destructively do this as well. Use masks. You can make many save files. You can have new layers where you try something out and then, no, I don't like that, and then take off that layer. So that's why I think digital is very, very useful. Ink. So this is one of the things that people talk about as, oh, you should do this. And I did use ink for a while, and I stopped using an eraser because I heard people say, if you want to get better at drawing, you should get rid of the eraser. Don't use any tools like digital, and just use ink, straight ink, and it'll teach you how to draw better. And it did not for me. However, it did teach me some things that helped me draw better, but it didn't make me better at drawing, but it gave me decisiveness and a much better understanding of value structure. Because when you only have two values, either black or white, you clarify things much better than if you can use gradients, if you can use a lot of in-between values. So being able to simplify something to purely black or white helps, because even in good paintings that have a lot of like a full value range, they still are organized, the best ones anyway, in my view, are organized into light areas and dark areas, your lights and your shadows, and then how within those you have subtle value transitions, but you try and still keep those two worlds a little bit separate, and ink helps with that. And then, yeah, with decisiveness, it's because you can't screw up so much. So one of the things I forgot to write that ink definitely gets you is you learn to visualize things on a page better than with pencil, because with pencil or any tool you can erase, because you can erase it, it's sort of getting in the way of your visualization. Whereas with ink, because as soon as you put down this mark, it's there, it's permanent. You can, like, over time, what happened is I was almost able to see the lines, like ghost images of lines on the page before I drew them. And I could move those lines in my, like, as I looked at the page until it was like, yeah, that looks right. And then I could put down the line right where it was supposed to go. And this is something that I got from ink and using ink. So that's was hugely important to me. And now I'll say the exact opposite thing, which is why erasers are good and Control Z, because people sometimes say don't use Control Z, it makes you lazy, it makes you not think, and fair enough, there is that side to it. That's the con of it. But what's the pro of it? Well, the pro of erasing and things like Control Z is you get to fix things and see what looks right. Like maybe you're not able to visualize something, or what you visualize is sort of what you expect, but maybe the solution is outside of that. Maybe the solution is something you don't expect, you haven't yet considered. What erasing and redrawing helps you do is, again, like the digital freedom to experiment. Control Z is the digital version of that, and a good eraser is the traditional version. But you can like put something down, analyze it, erase it, redraw it, analyze it, erase it, redraw it, and build this sense of what right looks like. Because when you hit it and it's right, then you know it. And if you've gone through many iterations of like, it's not right, okay, erase, try again, it's still not right, okay, erase, try again, what if I put it like this, it's not right, okay, erase, try again, and then boom, oh, that's right, that looks good, that's the line I wanted to make. You will remember that much better because you went through that struggle. And that's how the brain works. You know, when we struggle, we're kind of frustrated, but then when we hit on the solution, there's like a release of dopamine or something, and then we remember the thing way more. So using an eraser actually helped me draw better than inking did. Inking helped me visualize, but erasing a lot and redrawing and erasing and redrawing, it gave me a lot more confidence because I was able to make the image look like what I wanted it to look like. Whereas with ink, it was sort of like I've put down my best version of what I think, but there are mistakes and I can't really mess with them. And I'm just going to have to try to remember and apply that next time, solve my problem in the next image. Whereas by erasing, I could kind of make it so I was like, no, this one looks good. And then I was getting used to seeing what good or correct or right, these are all, I'm using air quotes because they're all subjective, looks like, and then I could replicate that more easily. So these are just, as I said, just a few of the cross-disciplinary options you have at your disposal. So when you think of things like what is important in art, or if you think like, well, I want to get better at drawing, and someone tells you, well, you need to learn your fundamentals, and you have this feeling of, well, if I just learn my fundamentals, that's enough. Not really. And also, it gets you out of certain things. Like for me, observation, what that taught me is something that was counter to what everyone else had said, which is, and even what I say a lot, which is you get better at drawing by drawing. Yes, but you also, or yes, and you also get better at drawing by observing and, in a sense, not drawing. So if you are observing a lot, like even if you're doing a figure drawing and it's a 2-minute figure drawing and you have two people, one person, he's got 2 minutes, he quickly puts his pencil to the page and starts doing the figure drawing. The other person takes 1 minute and spends that first minute not drawing at all, just looking, just observing, being very careful. And then the second minute, okay, draw now, draw everything, put it down on the page. I am quite certain the one who observed for a minute will create a better image than the one who just went straight to drawing. Because if you go straight to drawing and you're not observing enough, you are wasting time. You're putting down things that are sort of guesses. You're not understanding enough, and you can't invent enough. You can't, you're sort of like, you draw and then you look and then you draw and then you look and then you draw and then you look. Whereas if you're observing, you kind of take it all in, try to understand as much as you can, and then you draw, and then maybe you forgot some part, so you look, and that's like, okay, yeah, that's what it looks like. Okay, and then you draw. So you're getting more done, I feel. So, yep, that's my take on cross disciplines. I hope this helps, and thanks for watching.